Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where it's time for my weekend reading report. My weekend reading report. Every weekend, Roger and I will talk about all the exciting stuff that I read the previous week and anything that might have shown up here at the manor and, some of the stuff I'm going to be reading in the week ahead. It's all terribly exciting. Now, this past week was very busy during the week. So I did okay last weekend. I had some time to read last weekend. I did okay. But this week, man. So I'm putting up this video up a day early. It usually goes on Sunday. It's going on Saturday this week if everything goes right. Because I'm driving up to the rustic Vaughan Lodge. So the next time you see me, that's where I'll be. And hopefully I will have, so there'll be nothing up on Sunday, but hopefully I'll have a Monday video up, although it might not be up on time. It might come in late. It might show up late. So we'll see how that goes. But enough of that nonsense about the channel. Let's talk about what I read this week. So, like I said, I didn't read a ton, but what I did read was pretty darn good. So, for Roger's Cheapo Book Club, Roger, every month, has chosen a book for his cheap old book club. And it's always a totally cheap book. You can get any book that Roger chooses on Project Gutenberg for free, or in other places for free, or, really cheap, because it's all in the public domain. And this month's pick for Roger's Cheapo Book Club, I finished up this week, and it was really good. It's this one. This is Gladiator by Philip Wylie. So I won't go into a tremendous amount of detail on this because I do plan on doing a video just on Gladiator by Philip Wylie. This was published in 1930 and it was very influential. It is about a man who has superpowers. His father was kind of a mad scientist and experimented on him while he was in the womb. And he turned out to have superpowers. Now, this is interesting because this character existed before there were any superheroes. And it was very influential on the creation of Superman. Basically, this character has the powers that Superman has when Superman first showed up in the golden age of comics. This is before Superman had a ton of powers. Basically, he was nothing less than a bursting shell could hurt him. Now, a bursting shell he doesn't even notice, of course. But back in those days, if he got hit with a bomb, yeah, that might hurt him. But bullets bounce off. He's super strong. He can, leap tremendous distances because of his great strength. So he's got superpowers. And very influential on the creation of Superman for sure. And probably on a lot of other superheroes. Which I'll talk, like I said, I'll talk more about this book when I do the video on it. But really interesting, surprisingly moving, and very well written. I don't understand why there isn't a Penguin Classics edition of this, considering how important it is, how influential it's been on other stories and in other media, and just because it's a really well-written book. Actually, it's good. This is a good book. So I was very happy with this one. This could be the best thing that I've read so far. Well, no, it's not. But it's close. It's close to being the best thing that I've read for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. The Prisoner of Zenda, I think, is still better than this, but this comes close. This comes close. So yeah, I read Gladiator, and for my 500 book challenge, the everlasting challenge, where I have to read 500 books I own before I'll buy any new ones, for myself anyway, this is a number which I never, whenever I make these videos, I can never remember what number it is. So I'll find out and I'll put it right here. It's this number. That's what this is. So yeah, I finished that and was very happy with it. So next month, got another pick for Roger's Cheapo Book Club. Now next month is going to be Sumerian September, of course. And I have gotten some questions about Sumerian September, about how on earth I'm going to actually read everything that I'm claiming I'm going to read for next month. Well, I'm only reading a couple things, actually. They're just, long things. And they will go into October, obviously. But, of course, I'm going to be reading every single scrap of everything that Robert E. Howard wrote about Conan, as you can read it in the 3-volume Del Rey set, or this, The Complete Chronicles of Conan by Robert E. Howard. I'm not sure which one I'm going to read. I'll probably read the 3-volume set from Del Rey because I think that's the best, but this is just so cool looking and this would count. So I'm going to be reading this, but then I'm going to be reading the book for Roger's Cheapo Book Club as soon as I finish that. So it'll probably be towards the end of the month when I actually read it. And the book for Roger's Cheapo Book Club, appropriately enough, does involve another Conan, but this time it's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle with the exploits of Brigadier Gerard. That is the book for next month's Roger's Cheapo Book Club, The Exploits of Brigadier Gerard. I'll actually be reading 2 books for this, because there were 2 collections, and I have them both in this one paperback, The Complete Brigadier Gerard, which has the exploits of Brigadier Gerard and the adventures. But if you're following along with the book club, you only have to read the exploits. You don't have to read the adventures if you don't want to. Actually, you don't have to read any of this stuff if you don't want to, but if you want to, I'm probably going to end up reading both in between my Conan projects. So, The Complete Chronicles of Conan, then Roger's Cheapo Book Club for me, The Complete Brigadier Gerard. Then, after that, I'm going to be returning to Conan, the other Conan, the Barbarian, for the L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter and Robert E. Howard paperback set, which was published in the late 60s and the 70s. I made a video about this, and after Brigadier Gerard, I'm going to be reading the Lancer, the original Lancer paperback set, where L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter put a bunch of their pastiche stuff in with the original Conan stuff in the order of Conan's life. They were originally 12 volumes, and I'm going to be reading the 12 volumes. But then, of course, after the initial 12 volumes, which told the story of Conan's life in the order that it happened, then, of course, they made more books because, Conan was selling, and they had to go back in time for those. And they've been doing that ever since with Conan Pastiche. So I'll be reading the 12, the original initial 12 volumes. And maybe I'll read more. We'll see, but I'm definitely going to be reading this. And that will probably take me into October. Shouldn't take me through October, but it'll take me into October. And then I will reassess. But Gladiator was not the only thing I read. I've started this book. Now, it is Garbogust this month. The great reading event created by CriminOlly. Probably the greatest reading event ever created by anybody on BookTube. And this week, or this past week, it was novelizations and movie tie-ins was one of the themes for the week. And so, of course, I've got a ton of Planet of the Apes books because I'm a huge Planet of the Apes fan. So I'm reading at this very moment Death of the Planet of the Apes. This is a book by Andrew E.C. Gaska, who knows a lot about Planet of the Apes, actually, which is good. You can tell he knows a thing or two and has thought a lot about Planet of the Apes, because this story, this novel, takes place during the film Beneath the Planet of the Apes. So it's basically, it reads like an expanded version of the film Planet of the Apes. So it tells the story, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. So it tells the story of Beneath the Planet of the Apes. This tells the story of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, but also a bunch of other stuff besides. You know, all the stuff that Taylor experienced during the film and before the film that you never got to see is in this. A lot of ape politics. A lot of really interesting stuff about Dr. Zaius, where we examine his motivations for everything that he does during the two films, Planet of the Apes and Beneath the Planet of the Apes. It's really entertaining. And if you're a fan of this stuff, as I am, it's really interesting. And I haven't gotten too terribly far in it. I'm reading it with Gareth, actually, from the wonderful channel Books, Songs, and Other Magic. We're both reading this. We're buddy reading Beneath the Planet of the Apes, or actually Death of the Planet of the Apes. And, you know, it should be fun. I should be finished with this by the time I catch you next week. So I will tell you more about this book and how it ended up and all of that. But, you know, it's a good time, so I'm reading that. After that, we should still have some time in Garb-August. Now, I am going to be reading, probably the next thing I'll read is Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar. Not that this is at all it's Tarzan. Tarzan is not trash. It's high class. It's high class literature, you know. Sure it is. And this is Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar, which is the 5th Tarzan book for my Edgar Rice Burroughs deep dive. I'm finally getting to this one. Edgar Rice Burroughs is going to be taking a back seat for the next month and a half, probably. But I'm planning towards the end of the year to just binge read a bunch of Edgar Rice Burroughs to kind of get myself back on track. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So I read all that. And of course I read comic books and read Superman every day. Every day I read Superman. So I've been reading the Golden Age Superman Volume 2, which is interesting. His powers have increased actually quite a bit. And it's only been a couple years that Superman's been out by the time that this, by the stories that are collected in this volume. And, you know, he doesn't officially fly yet, but he's flying. Because he's like, you can't jump and move around. He's flying. He just, you know, they haven't really said, hey, look, I'm flying, but he's clearly flying. So there's that, and there's also Batman, the Silver Age Omnibus Volume 1. Still reading that. Probably be reading them for a while, since I'm only reading one story a day from those guys. Although I did read one story also from this. This is Silver Age World's Finest Volume 2. I read the first story out of this book too, which was glorious because, you know, Superman, Batman, this is the issue that I read where Batman gets superpowers. And suddenly, for some reason, Batman and Superman hate each other. Dick Sprang art. It's really fantastic. This one page alone is worth the price of the book, where you have Batman and Superman fighting. I mean, look at that. Look at that. Crash! It's awesome. You know, they just temporarily hate each other, and now Batman has superpowers. So it's, you know, a battle of the Titans, illustrated by Dick Sprang. It's great. It's great. So I read that. But as you know, if you caught my last episode, I'm also doing a thing called Sunday Comics, where every Sunday I just take a pile of more or less random comics and read them. I'll just sit down with a cup of coffee or two and read a pile of floppy comic books. All old, because I'm all about old stuff, obviously. So, for the Sunday Comics, last Sunday, the first thing I read was this. It's Tales from the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt from the glorious EC Comics. Now, this is not an original, obviously. This is from Gladstone. It was a reprint. Gladstone did reprints of EC Comics for a while. And what they'd do is they would reprint 2 comic books in an issue. So this is the 6th Gladstone issue, but they weren't reprinting this series in order. So it actually contains Tales from the Crypt number 42, which was from 1954, and Crime Suspense Stories number 27 from 1955. This is a reprint that was done in 1991. It's awesome. The artwork, this series of reprints, the artwork is reproduced. It's not of the highest quality, but still certainly good enough. And it was a lot of fun. This is just EC Comics, man. They're so great, especially at about the time that these reprinted issues were published. I mean, at this point, EC Comics was just rolling on all cylinders, and lots of blood and guts and gory stuff going on at this point. So it was awesome. So yeah, Tales from the Crypt. That's the first thing I read. Then I started this series the previous week. This is the Dark Horse series, Doc Savage, Curse of the Fire God, which, as far as I know, has never been reprinted. So I think this is still the only way you can get this series. Doc Savage, Curse of the Fire God. Of course, Doc Savage is the great old pulp hero that was reprinted in a bunch of paperback books in the 60s and into the 70s. It's awesome. The artwork is okay. It's decent. It's, probably not the best artwork in the world, but, it's decent. And this is a decent, fun adventure. So, yeah, it's cool. It's Doc Savage. So, this was a 4-issue series. This is the 2nd issue of that. So, that was fun. Then, Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. It's Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. An eye for an eye. You'll never forget the roaring revenge of Nick Fury. Nick Fury's pissed in this one, and he's going to get his revenge. So, this was an awesome issue, although this is issue 121. And at this point, all they were doing was reprinting earlier issues. So this is a reprint, actually, of an earlier issue of Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. This is something that some Marvel comics, they did. They did this stuff, this kind of thing. And so this reprinted Sergeant Fury issue number 19. And I have to say, though, it's really, really good. And I guess you could assume that at the time that issue 121 came out, the readers of this comic probably didn't have any of those old back issues. And so Dick Ayers does the artwork for this issue, and I have to say, he's really good on this comic. He's good on Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. He's no Jack Kirby, but still, he's good. And this was an excellent story, and it was probably one of the better comics that I read this past weekend. So yeah, that was awesome. So to follow that up with something really high class. Actually, this is really appropriate for Garbogust. Thongor. So this is Creatures on the Loose. And for a while, Creatures on the Loose was doing a Thongor series. So Creatures on the Loose number 28. Thongor, warrior of the lost land, against the hordes of hell in the great tradition of Conan. It might be in the tradition of Conan, but it's not exactly the same thing. So this is a series that's based on a character created by Lynn. Sorry about that. I had to take a phone call. Can you imagine people calling me during my reading report when I'm talking about Thongor? What are people thinking? Anyway, Thongor. Lynn Carter's Thongor, which was a series of paperback books which, you know, they adapted because, you know, I think Stan Lee was like, man, Conan's doing so well. Of course, Thongor will do just as well, because I don't think Stan Lee really understood Conan or his appeal or why he sold, but he did sell. So he's like, let's find some other barbarian hero. Thongor, yeah. He's obviously just as good, right? No. But it is a pretty cool comic book, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, Creatures on the Loose. Thongor. And then I got classy. I have to get classy once in a while with Classics Illustrated. Remember these? If you're an old timer like me, you probably had some of these just lying around collecting dust. This is Classics Illustrated, and this is the Classics Illustrated version of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. And it's actually a really good version of The Time Machine, I have to say. First of all, look at that awesome cover. Great cover. These classic Illustrateds, which was a series of comics that reprinted classics of literature, including The Time Machine. And it, like I said, it was actually a really good version of The Time Machine. It's pretty cool. There he is hanging out with the Eloy, you know. And the Morlocks in here are really creepy. There's some of the really creepy Morlocks grabbing onto his feet. You can all remember this exciting scene. Now this version is sort of a... They made a couple changes in this version, but it's still really cool. It's pretty close. It's pretty close to the original story. And since it was such a short little book, they didn't have to cut a lot out when they made this. Usually they cut a ton out to make a comic book version, whatever book they were doing. They didn't have to cut out much in this. So you get most of the Time Machine in there. Then Batman. So this is Batman, issue 558, which is after the big earthquake. There was a big earthquake that hit. When was it, the 1990s? Yeah, this is 1998. After there's been a big earthquake in Gotham City. And it apparently turned Batman into a big wimpy baby Batman. Because the first thing you see, well, the Batcave was demolished. And the first thing you see is this scene where he's clinging on to Alfred like a little child. Help me, Alfred. I need strength. Since when? Isn't this supposed to be Batman? And, you know, the next scene. I'm not good with death, old friend. Never have been. It shatters me. I know, sir, says Alfred. When did Batman become such a wimp? One little earthquake and you get crying, weepy Batman. I was somewhat disappointed. This is illustrated, at least. I think it was... Who did this? Who wrote this? Doug Mensch wrote this. He usually, you know, he's a little hit and miss, Doug Mensch. That's true. And he was definitely miss in this one. Of course, Batman has to go to his parents' grave, which he does all the time. Literally always. So here he is, once again, going to his grave, or his parents' grave, to be depressed and whimper about things. This is a bit of a disappointment, this presentation of Wimpy Batman from 1998. I'm glad he's toughened up a little bit since then. So there was that. Then, Charlton Comics, Strange Suspense Stories. Now, I mentioned last weekend, that Charlton Comics was kind of like pretty third rate after DC and Marvel. This does have a Jim Aparo cover, which is better than anything that Jim Aparo did in this Batman issue. It's a pretty good cover. The stories were just okay. It was a fun little issue, you know, little supernatural, ghosty type stories. Pretty, you know, pretty tame. Pretty tame after, you know, reading the EC stuff. But still, pretty fun. And you get some pretty cool advertisements to look at, you know. So there you go. Strange Suspense Stories. This next one was a lot more fun. This was Worlds Unknown, another issue of Worlds Unknown. This is Worlds Unknown number 2, A Gun for a dinosaur from an Elsprag de Camp story. There's also a Keith Laumer story in here. And this one was pretty good. I have to say, going back in time and shooting dinosaurs, which is not a particularly original idea, but this was a fun take on it. This is a cool series. I'm really enjoying this series a lot. And the next story was Doorstep. So basically in this series, they just adapt existing stories. And you can never go wrong with dinosaurs. Well, I guess you can, but you know, usually you don't go wrong with dinosaurs. So this version, or excuse me, this issue, Worlds Unknown #2, was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. Look who's smiling now. This guy is. Then, Tarzan. So, I started reading Dark Horse's version of Tarzan from 1996 last week. And isn't this a cool cover? This is a cool cover. Tarzan, looking like he's in trouble. Giant spider. Always got to watch out for those giant spiders. So, this is issue #2 from Dark Horse's Tarzan continuing series from the 90s, which didn't last terribly long. But it was good. It was actually a really good comic written by Bruce Jones and penciled by Christopher Schenk. And, you know, he did a pretty good job. This is a good comic book. It was only reprinted once, as far as I know, but it was reprinted in a paperback edition from Dark Horse, I think in 2015. But it's cool. This is a cool issue of Tarzan. The last thing I read for Sunday Comics was also Tarzan, a double dose of Tarzan this week, but this one was really special. This is Marvel Comics' version of Tarzan. This is Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle #1 from Marvel Comics, with Roy Thomas writing it and John Buscema drawing it. So the team from Conan the Barbarian doing Tarzan. And it is fantastic. Remarkably, this run, despite being one of the best Tarzan runs I could think of, was never reprinted. It's never been reprinted. The only way is, I could be wrong, and if I am, let me know, but I think the only way you can read this is in these original issues from Marvel Comics. And when was this published? It was published in 1977. And the artwork on this is just fantastic. I mean, just pure awesomeness. I mean, this version of Tarzan is just great. These guys really had a handle on this character, and the artwork is just beautiful. The story is excellent. This is actually based on Tarzan and the Jewels of Opar, which hopefully I will be reading next week. So that's cool. So that was Sunday Comics. Those are the Sunday comics I read. The only thing that showed up at the Manor was not terribly exciting. An epic collection, but this is X Factor Judgment War. So this is X Factor Volume 4 from 89 and 90. I'm not a huge X Factor fan. I never was, but you know, it's an epic collection, so of course I've got it. Of course I've got it. And I will probably read it someday when I'm 80 and I finally get to that stuff. So I've yammered on for forever now. I will let you go. I will catch you next time.